Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Jackie Kibler. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm so excited to have you as a guest on this podcast because, Jackie, you've been in leadership roles for about 30 years. And 10 of those, you actually been coaching CEOs and help them to grow and scale and achieve what they want.
Right.
And specifically for the last few years, you've been an EOS implementer, a very successful one. You have clients all over the US in a variety of industries, and you're very passionate about what you do. And I had the privilege to talk to several of your clients, and they just love you. You do a fantastic job. And I'm so excited to have you and talk today specifically about processes for business development, because that's one of your areas of expertise from your career. And you totally, when we're going to talk about that, you totally know what you're talking about, because you'll give us the whole history. So we'll see why you are an expert in that area. But let's start with being an EOS implementer. What made you want to be an EOS implementer?
So it's so funny. My path in EOS actually started when I worked at Vistage Worldwide. So I coached around 100 CEOs there that ran their practices, trying to help them grow their groups, build new groups, etc. And one of the chairs came up to me and he handed me a traction book. He's like, you have to read this book. It is the space that Vistage doesn't have, that is desperately needed within the businesses that we represent. And so I read the book and talked to a couple implementers and fell in love with it, because it was everything that I was doing throughout the course of my career by happenstance, except this was on steroids in a proven process that was global with the community. And so it was really the only place I wanted to go once I decided to go off on my own. And it's been probably the most rewarding 3 years of my entire career.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for those listeners that are not familiar with EOS, let's define EOS.
Okay. So EOS is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's based off the book Traction, written by Gino Wickman. And really what it helps companies do is something that we call Vision Traction Healthy, which I'm sure you've heard about 10,000 times. But for your listeners, vision is working with the leadership team as a whole, crafting a vision that you can sort of go lock in step with, and everyone aligns to it because they all help to create it. Now, if you can also imagine, that would create, if you've got the right people in the right seats, this execution of that vision, because you've got to have the right people in the right seats to execute against the vision. Otherwise, the vision will never come to realization. But that traction or execution of the leadership team all going and, arm in arm together, which then goes through the organization, is key and critical. And if you take all that and put it together, it helps to create a healthier organization, not just from the perspective of profitability, which everyone wants, but also from a happier, healthier culture. And so that's what EOS is. I work with them on what's called the 6 key components, which is, I'll just walk through it real quick. It's vision, people, data, issues, process, and then traction. And process is the one that I reached out to you for help with, which I was extremely grateful to get that referral.
Yes, so we're going to talk about process, but before that, I want to give a big shout out to Vistage. I mean, I've been part of Vistage for 6 years. My chair, Ron Merriman, just won 3 awards. He is amazing, and I really attribute a lot to Vistage for the growth of my business and being able to think outside the box and think bigger and know that things are possible and make things possible. So definitely I want to thank Ron and I want to thank Vistage. So now that you mentioned Vistage, definitely wanted to give that shout out.
It was probably one of the most profound ways I've grown professionally and personally was working with that organization. And I'm still close to a lot of the chairs. They are some amazing mentors.
Absolutely. Well, let's explain Vistage to our listeners in case they don't know what Vistage is.
Sure. So Vistage Worldwide is a CEO peer organization. So, and actually not just CEOs in larger companies. There are several types of groups that they have. So they've got their CEO groups for some larger organizations, key executive groups. And it actually doesn't even, they're peer groups, meaning you have a chair who is your executive coach. And then you also have the group that are your peers, same types of companies, meaning size, not industry, because they don't compete. But you are able to work with these people once a month in effort to bounce ideas, walk through problems or issues that you're having as a leader within the organization. It might be something at home because it is sort of a holistic approach to working with you as a human. But people stay with them for a very long time because they always, usually, especially with business owners and CEOs, they feel like they're on an island. And so they don't have anybody to talk to. And when they're in these groups and get pounded with these groups and their coach, then all of a sudden they've been able to let that pressure valve off.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So now that we discussed that, let's talk about the process for business development. And the reason why I chose to talk to you about processes for business development is, as you mentioned, I do processes. This podcast is all about processes. And, you have a lot of experience with business development.
Yeah.
And we talked just before the podcast of how important it is to actually have a proven system. And you had mentioned traction. So that proven system should have also ways to hold people accountable so that business development actually happens, so the actions are actually happening and being followed through so that you actually get results.
Right. So, and I'm going to apologize up front. I've got 2 pretty large dogs that are here, and it sounds like someone may be coming in at some point in the near future or passing by. Could be anything. So the way it's interesting. So I have led global sales teams of around 120 people. And I've had smaller mom and pop organizations that I've worked with as a leader also. But I grew up with Dun & Bradstreet, and that is the first place that I actually learned how to follow a process. And what was interesting is that the other part of my background is training and development. So it has become a passion play of mine, not just to tell somebody to do it, but also to show them how to do it and enforce it by having them follow a system to help them be successful. So business development, and it's so funny, one of our sister, the parent company, Firefly, they acquired an organization called Sales Acceleration. And in Sales Accelerations, they are fractional chief revenue officers that will go in and implement process and create sales structure. One of the things that I have found with organizations that I work with now and that I have helped lead is that lack of structure. People aren't making the calls. They're not making the touches. They're not using social media. And the cool thing with businesses is if you have any type of business, you want to make sure some of that resource is reinvesting in the organization, whether it is through SEO, whether it's through pay-per-click. whether it's through picking up the phone and dialing a phone number. I remember even with the chairs that I supported, I'm like, did you call somebody? Well, no, I sent them an email. Okay, so if you were, as I heard this on like some, like, I don't know, skit that I was watching, probably on Facebook. That just shows my age. But you think about texts or emails and not calling, and here's what this thing was. If you had someone that you, like a guy that you had a crush on, and you were going to go, or you were going to connect with him, would you send a text? No. Would you send an email? No. You'd call the person. So, I mean, the whole thing is that it's very, very easy to ignore people if they're sending texts or emails. Emails especially. How many emails, Addie, do you get in a day?
Many, because I have like my filters and I have my folders and I have an executive assistant that probably majority of his day is handling my emails. So I don't. Yeah. So
it's difficult, for anybody, especially someone in sales that doesn't know who their salesperson is, who their prospect is, if you don't reach out and call. And I actually, with people now, it's like the triple threat, right? First you send an email, first you call them, then you send an email. And if you have their phone number, fine, text them, but it's a triple play. Mm-hmm. You're doing all three because the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and you have to have a value proposition. What's the value proposition? Because no one's going to call you back or even pick up anything if you don't have a value proposition. What's in it for me? Right. So that's key and critical. And one of the things, and I know, you go and you close the deal. Actually, I should probably talk about that part too, because you can have the nicest salesperson in the world. So in EOS land, we call that they're the right people. And you can have the nicest person who lives and breathes your core values, and they are great at building relationships with prospects. And then they don't ask for the sale. So the chances of that person being successful when they're not asking for the sale is going to be small, right?
Absolutely. Do you think that it should be separated? Like it's like in EOS language, okay, so the right people, but do you think that's going to be like there is a right person to do business development, which is basically cultivating the leads, maybe doing the cold calls, cultivating the relationship, explaining, getting that agreement for the involvement and the interest, and then you have the closer or the salesperson who actually goes, does the presentation, then leads it all the way to the close. Would you say that sometimes, or from your experience, do they have to be two separate people, or can one person have the same skills?
So there are two different schools of thought on that. With corporate executive board, which is a place that I worked, that was the place that I had a lot of people that I worked with. We actually had teams, and I outsourced to partner companies to do the cold calling and schedule the appointments. And then the salesperson would come in and, do the presentation and then close the deal. But then there are other companies like a Dun & Bradstreet, and I can keep going with, where you eat what you kill. Right. So they go, it's from point A to point Z. So I think it really depends on the school of thought. One of the things that I find interesting where they break it up is that you're following up and this is also where so many salespeople and even sales leaders and CEOs have issues. It's that follow-up period. So if you have it broken apart, I'm following up with you just to get the lead, to get the appointment. I'm following up with you to close. And so that keeps those lines very specific, which mm-hmm. I think is really important.
I think so too.
Yeah. Conversely, if that's not an option for me, you just better keep your system, whether it's your calendar, task, Trello board, whatever you're using, you just want to make sure that you keep that really up to date. What I have found is that there are so many people that just fall off the wagon when it comes to following up to close the deal.
Absolutely. I mean, it's closing the deal, but it's also in the business development. So we have two proven processes. We have the proven process for business development, right? Which will be finding the leads, finding the sources of the lead. As you said, an organization should invest in their marketing. So you get it either via the internet or you get it from referrals. You have a strong networking, which can be a process by itself on how to network successfully. And I did do a great podcast with a dear friend of mine, Alice Tang, from askalicetang.com, where she actually laid down the proven process of how to keep track of your referral sources and how to stay in touch with them, right?
Oh,
all the
that's
touch
great.
points. Yeah, I really recommend listening to it. So that's part of business development. And then you develop the business, right? So you have to have those touch points. You have to stay in touch. You have to make sure that they develop into a lead, and then you take them to the proven process of the sales, which is what you explained. And then, I agree. So it depends on the organization, on the size, on what is the final product or service. It can go all the way from business development to the close, or it can be separated, right?
Yeah.
So, part of EOS, we have the proven process. So the proven process is basically the process that have proven itself to be workable, right?
Absolutely.
Like when you explain to your clients a proven process, how do you explain that?
So this is the way it's an infographic with the way you work with your clients from cradle to grave. So that's the proven process. Now the process component is a little different than that, right? Mm-hmm. But I use my proven process with every single prospective client that I work with. And that is, it's really helpful because it helps to mitigate objections that might come from the sales and marketing process, or biz dev process, if you will.
That's right. So if you have that process and you follow it, well, first of all, you're right. Like the proven process is what you actually show the customer or the client. Hey, this is my proven process. This is how we're going to go through the sales process.
Yeah.
And also the proven process of what will happen after you become a client, right? So it can be like, for example, one of my clients showed me their proven process and we were documenting their sales processes, and their proven process is like, okay, now we're doing the need analysis and this is what's going to happen throughout this process. Then if you decide to move forward, we're going to do the deep dive and this is what you're going to get from there. And then if you become a client, then this is going to happen and that's going to happen. So you have the proven process of how you are actually going to go from all the way from a lead to a close, but from the perspective of the client. Yes. So I think that's a very important tool. But then you're right, you have the process itself, which is basically the proven process is the graphic representation on it, but you have the process. So once you have the process, obviously we know from EOS is very big on followed by all, because a process is only as good as it's being followed, right? Yes. So let's say you're working with a client and they develop that process for business development. How do you, from your experience, what's the best practices to actually make sure that the business development process is being followed by all?
So that's a great question because they're all so different. So the first thing that you want to have them do is you want to make sure that they're actually rolling it out. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the way some of the companies do, and I'll do it two different ways. If it is for everybody in an organization, so if I'm in a sales-based organization, like the attorney firm that you saw that I was with in New Jersey, everybody there does biz dev. So the CEO needs to go up and share what's happening from a broad scope. And then the leaders are going with their teams to make sure that they understand, they're getting trained on it. And then what I love about it is then you're having the leaders inspect what you expect from the people that are there, right? I showed you how to fish. Now I want to see you fish. There's this scorecard measurable that is attached to it, which I suggest for everybody who's implementing any type of new process.
Right.
And then also you want to make sure that you're managing to that. So we call it LMA, leading, managing, and holding people accountable. You're leading and you're managing people to that, what the process and the number, the metric. And my favorite part of Followed by All, as a former person who used to do training and development, is the fact that every quarter you have to go in and update any changes that happened within that process. There's nothing worse, and I've lived this many moons ago, where you're training somebody to do something and it's like, yeah, this is what it says. Oh, wait, but cross it off and change it to this. And you're going down and you're like, yeah, don't even pay attention to that because that's not what this is. Here's what it is. So I love updating everything quarterly. And so that's how it's rolled out. That's how FBA or Followed by All is rolled out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was also looking at, we're talking about FBA specifically for business development, right? So there is an art and there is more following the rules, right? Because, you can be, it's a lot of being able to network and talk to people, but you also have to have the accountability of following up enough or touch points for the same person several times. Absolutely. Or whatever the process is. Then, as you said, like the scorecard should also measure those activities in order to lead to the final product.
Yeah. Well, and actually let's use that as an example, because there are a lot of companies that have not done a ton with it. I'll just use networking because that's what you brought up. Many times what happens is people rely on the exact same resource that they've relied on and never expand that. There are a lot of groups that are out there to help you network. And actually anybody that you know that is in business might know somebody to help you build your pipeline. So one metric might be every week I am adding X number to my pipeline, or adding X number of, we call them connectors in EOS. What events are you going to, or how many are you going to every week? Because the scorecard is measured every week. How many calls did you make from the people that you met, to your point? And where are you in that process? So that's 3 different ways from one area, right? It's making sure that you are connecting with the right people. And I'll using myself as an example, when I first started with EOS, I thought I had hundreds of connectors because I knew so many people even within Vistage. But what you begin to realize is there's going to be a handful that they start referring people to, and you have to treat them like gold. So you might start with something that's that big and then whittle it down, and you're adding a few more. But that scorecard metrics around networking, it's huge because it holds you accountable to it.
Absolutely. And that's really how you can also get traction. If you're actually doing the actions that will lead to a product, that's how you will get traction, and you have to measure it and you have to hold people accountable to it. So that's how all the aspects, they come together. It's not just, we can't just concentrate on one aspect. You have to have all of the 6 components in place in order for actually get what you want from your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, that's very powerful. So as soon as you said action with traction, I'm like, oh, I'm so stealing that. I'm so stealing that.
It's all yours, Jackie. The more we promote it, the better it's going to be, because we have so much more action. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for the traction and the action. And that is, we use today, and the example of the business development, it can apply to any part of the organization. But I wanted to demonstrate how a proven process or a process can be created around business development, around sales, and then make sure it's being followed by all, tied to a scorecard, making sure that you actually manage it and hold people accountable, right? You lead through it. And, another aspect that I really like about EOS is the IDS, right? Is the issue. So explain about IDS.
So IDS is the way we solve issues. And what I love about IDS, so what it stands for our issue solving track, is identify, discuss, and solve. That's what the acronym is for. Identifying is identifying the root cause of an issue. And I'll give you an example of this in a little bit. But so we identify it, put all information out on the table once to discuss it. And what I loved about it, and then we come to an agreed upon solution. But up until EOS, when I would go into meetings, in many instances, you would go into a meeting, someone would bring up a problem, we would discuss it ad nauseum, then the time would be up and we would leave. And I would look at a colleague and say, did we even decide anything in that? With EOS, that's not the case. And the reason is if someone starts saying something for a second time or soapboxing, you can call it whatever you want, but, wanting to hear themselves talk a lot, whoever is leading the meeting is like, hey, Jackie, we've already heard this before. Thank you for it. Does anyone else have any new information on this? Because if not, then we need to come to an agreed upon solution. That action, there's always got to be an action. And it kind of is where the rubber meets the road when you talk about traction with this, because any of the clients that I work with, or any of most EOS clients, regardless of who their implementer is, they will tell you that IDS has helped them have much more productive meetings because of that. All right. And one of the things that I find extremely different also is this example. So there's a construction company in Southern California. Guy comes in to their meeting and says to the leadership team, hey, truck fire, that's mine. It was the first one that we prioritized on our list to talk about today. I took Rich to the hospital to make sure he was okay. I called up insurance and obviously called the fire department to have it out. Normally, and most companies, and this one too, the leadership team would have been like, thanks so much, Joe, for letting us know. Really appreciate you taking care of that. But what they did instead is that they were asking questions. And those questions came to find out that as they were doing digging, there was never a process around truck maintenance. This was the third truck fire in 5 years. So think of the soft costs and hard costs associated with these losses. So there were 4 things that you had to do as the solution. Number 1, they had to write a process or policy around truck maintenance. 2, they had to call people in to get trained. 3, they had to train the folks. And then 4, they wanted people to sign off on the training. And the reason for that is that if it happened again, they would have already begun the documentation process. So that was a lot. Most action items, we call them to-dos in EOS, but most action items have to be completed in 7 days. This was kind of a big thing. So what we did is we had week 1, the process written. It wasn't the perfect process, but we look at progression. So there was a process and they sent out the invites for training. Second week, the training was held and they signed off on it. So now think of the future state of the organization since they were doing EOS and IDS. It would have just caused more issues, right? I know it's not part of biz dev, but it certainly, when you look at bringing revenue in and saving what we've got, that saving what we've got is important too. So
extremely important, because also the reputation, and there will be no biz dev if you actually don't handle that particular process.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, but the other reason why I brought up IDS is the way that you solve issues is because you can use the processes. So let's say, for instance, there are not enough. Like this week, there aren't enough leads that are coming through the organization, right? Whatever the firm, the company. So then it's an issue. We need to discuss that. But I'm a firm believer that it's either a people problem, a process problem, or both, right? So if you have a process for business development and there is an issue with the number of leads, because now it's tied into a scorecard and you can see that the number of leads is not enough, not sufficient, not viable, then you can look through your process. Was the process followed? If it was not followed, then why not? Then it becomes maybe a people problem. Why was it not followed? If it was followed and didn't get a satisfactory result, well, maybe there is something that we need to look at and change or adapt. Just like you said, there is the way that the thing's always been done, but maybe times are changing, or maybe there are new opportunities and you need to look at something else.
Absolutely.
Point being is that if you have a process, you can have a starting point and you can have a point of agreement that from there you can decide if you're going to change it or not and how to change it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a company that does debt consolidation loans. And so they're heavily monitoring what type of leads come in. And one of the things that I would add to what you said, it's not just, and it's particularly for this type of company, it's not just the amount of leads, it's the quality leads that fit what we're looking for. And I would definitely, for any of the companies that I'm working with, make sure that they're identifying the right types of leads by having the profile of their target market that they're looking at.
Absolutely.
So, huge part of it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's what I found to be the parts of the process is, you have to receive the leads. Somehow you have to be there to receive whatever leads. I mean, you need to know your sources of lead, but you have to receive the leads. You have to qualify the leads, to your point. Are they good for your organizations? Are they good for your firm? Are they good for your company? Then you need to do a need assessment to see if you're a good match. That's where the sales process starts.
Yes.
Then you need to create some kind of a proposal or an agreement or talk more. This is more the negotiation phase. Then you ask for the business, to your point at the beginning of the podcast, the close, right? And then the onboarding, the passing to the organizations. It doesn't end when you close. You have to have a process on how you actually very smoothly going to service them and pass them over to those in the organization that will service them and that they will feel very welcome. So the onboarding, that's really where the sales stops, is where you actually get them smoothly over to receive whatever they're paying you for. So that will be like the complete, it's like the business development, the way I see it, is the beginning is generating those leads, and then it goes into the sales process.
Right. And I'm glad that you've said it like that, because there are a lot of companies that combine those two. Mm-hmm. So if I'm talking about sales and biz dev, especially those companies that it's like, this is only one department, there's that A to Z type thing. So that makes total sense from what you're saying. And that warm handoff is so key and critical, because if you don't have that handoff done properly, the client is going to feel not as warm and welcomed as you would want them to.
Absolutely. Jackie, you are such a wealth of information, and it's very obvious that you know all about businesses, and you can totally help businesses succeed, grow, and get to the next level. So how can people find you if they would like to connect with you?
So my email address is jackie.kibler, Kibler, at eosworldwide.com. That's probably the best way to reach me.
Absolutely. And also probably on LinkedIn would be Jackie Kibler.
Yes.
Yeah. So either one of those, definitely reach out to Jackie. If you have any questions, if you'd like to work with her, great. Well, thank you, Jackie, for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely. And
you're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.